Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness. Whether you are a young gun looking to gain an edge in the mountains or an old herd bull looking to keep your edge, check out the Mountain Tough Fitness app and use the promo code OKS30 for a free 30-day trial. And my guest today is someone that was vital to my humble beginnings in archery elk hunting. His TV shows, podcasts, and social content helped form the core curriculum of my adult onset hunting and trapping journey. And he has been a voice of conservation for decades. In fact, just last week, he was bestowed the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation's highest honor of the Wallace Fennell Pete Wildlife Conservation Award. And if that's not enough of a resume, he has been a trapper his whole life. Randy Newberg, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Anytime we're going to talk trapping, I'll drop what I'm doing, weddings, funerals, and stuff like that. Those can wait. We're talking trapping here.
Yeah, it's amazing the amount of love trapping gets from people who actually do it. We can talk a little bit about how that is different from public perception, but usually I jump right into trapping questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
However, the sponsor I just mentioned, I think most trappers that listen to this gloss over, and that is Mountain Tough Fitness.
Yeah.
But I happen to know that you've been working on a very special project with the crew over in Bozeman. And before we get into trapping, can you speak a bit about how that special project came to be and why? In your 50s, you're taking on a whole new approach to fitness for the backcountry.
Yeah, I'll be 60 in November. And last year I ended up with a really major arm injury, and it set back my training. It set back pretty much everything, and it was pretty frustrating. And last hunting season, I felt like I was in the worst shape I've been in a long time. So I went over to see Dustin and those guys. I'm like, hey, you got any help for a desk jockey like me who, maybe I hunt 100 days a year, but I still spend too much time at a desk. And so they're like, well, let's try. So we went through the whole process, and now we just wrapped up week 5 of a class we're filming, or a course that you can do on your app. Kind of a very simple course, and it's called the 50 plus preseason program. And my wife said, you better get on the ball here, because pretty soon you take much longer to film that. It's going to be the 60 plus program. But so the idea of it is, a lot of people get in their 50s and you got an impairment like I do with my arm. I got a bum liver. I got some other things. And those could be excuses not to stay in shape, not to invest the time and effort in your hunting, in your trapping, in your health. And so they're using me as the guinea pig about why there should be no excuses.
Well, man,
And
you are a brave man for being a lab rat in that environment. I'm
yeah,
sure it is a challenge, but they're also amazing at programming. So I know they're
yep,
also probably putting together something that is within the bounds of working with your previous injuries, but also probably pushing you to the hilt. So for those
oh yeah,
listening, there are no excuses. And you heard it from Randy here to, use that promo code, go check them out, whether you're a young gun or an older individual trying to stay in shape. But that's amazing.
yeah. I'm thankful for it. It's I'm sleeping better. I'm feeling better. I'm eating better. Just all the things, I should probably be doing that, but I'm busy. I'm in a hurry. Well, I'm back on schedule.
I
So
got to ask, so who's in your ear? Is it Nate, Sarah, Dustin, or is it the
Sarah,
trio? Oh, oof, got
Sarah is my coach. And I told Sarah, because she's just about killing me some days. I said, Sarah, I don't know how old you are, but if I'm still alive when you're 59, I'm calling you up and I'm going to say, now go and put yourself what you just did to me.
you know,
And so we'll
it
see.
probably doesn't scare her. Sarah is an
Probably not.
absolute machine. So
Yeah. But
really cool. So,
yeah.
so Randy, from the intro, you've been in trapping your whole life, and
Yep.
one of the first questions I always ask my guests is, can you remember the first core memory you have of ever seeing or interacting with a trap line?
Yeah. Again, very first thing that I remember is my uncles. My mom comes from a family of 9. She had 6 brothers. Her uncles Elton and Mike took me out on their beaver trap line when I was about 5. And I'm like, whoa, this is cool. Look, they let you see a beaver for the first time up close when you're 5 years old, and you see the scales on the tail, you see the big web feet, and you see the big teeth. You're like, oh man, this is really cool. And they brought me home, and boy, I was going to be a trapper. So, the big rat traps, the wooden ones.
Mhm,
Uh, I somehow connived and finagled a way to get myself two of those rat traps, and they were my weasel traps.
mhm.
And I'd go put a little bit of whatever meat I could find on there, and I'd put those rat traps anywhere I saw two. And those of us who trap, right? We know a lot of people don't know a mink, a member of the mink family has the track they have. Well, I got taught right away. My uncles are like, you see these little ones, they're staggered a little bit, but they're close together and they're not very wide apart. Those are weasels. Boy, I was on the search for weasel tracks in the snow, and I caught a few of them. And then I had to figure out how to skin them. I had my little old Diamond Joe, whatever jackknife. And boy, did I make a stinky mess trying to skin those. But here's what I did. I probably got 5 or 6 of them, took them up to the hardware store. The guy who ran the hardware store, Owen Gordon, he'd let me trade enough. If I had enough fur, I could trade it for another trap or two.
Mm.
Well, then I really got big time. I got a couple number 1 jump traps. Boy, I'm going after mink next year. So it was. This is
So
so.
what year is this? So your uncles
This
were
is
trappers, and was
yeah.
this during the fur boom of, like, the late '70s, early
Oh,
'80s?
no, this was like the late '60s. I was born in '64.
Okay.
So, by 1970, Jeremiah Johnson, he hadn't even come out yet. He's Robert Redford was a fake, according to my family. We're the real thing. Uh, but if you grow up in northern Minnesota where I did, everybody trapped. I can't tell you how many Christmas presents, how many, mortgage payments, how many, bills got paid when the fur check showed up, or well, not the fur track. Usually it was a local fur buyer or a rural fur buyer come through town. They'd post a little handbill at the cafe. Hey, gonna be here buying fur next, Saturday afternoon, and that's how it would work. And boy, when people cashed their fur checks, it
Well, I mean,
was
through the '60s, '70s, '80s, even into
oh,
the '90s,
fur
I've talked
prices.
to
Yeah.
people who were still able to afford, like, a truck or,
Yep.
run a part-time line. I mean, obviously, we
Hmm.
all know that a part-time line is still a full-time job,
Right.
but, to be able to do it. So you were growing up around that
Yes.
era of
Yeah.
this can be an augmenting lifestyle that's not just for fun, which it is,
Hmm.
but it can actually help pay the bills. It can
Yeah.
provide you uh, a better lifestyle. Um,
Hmm.
is that what grabbed you? Just because you could see as a young guy that you could probably make a dime or two,
Hmm.
or what was it that
It
pulled you in?
it was part of that, and I just love being outdoors. People are like, "Well, who wants to go out sit outdoors in Minnesota?" I grew up between International Falls and Bemidji, a little town called Big Falls. Who wants to go out and be outdoors when it's 38 below zero in January? I did. I was just like, my mind was so fascinated by everything I saw out there. And I think once you get into it as a kid, and if you're lucky and your parents let you be this inquisitive, questioning kind of just someone who wants to learn, there's no better place to learn than being turned loose out in the woods or down along the wetlands or whatever. And so I lucked out that I I got into trapping from my uncles, and there were no social pressures against trapping where I grew up. Everybody trapped for a little spare money. Well, then I got my parents divorced when I was 10, and my mom was raising the three of us. I was the oldest. So then I got this entrepreneurial idea that, hey, I can sell night crawlers, I can catch minnows and sell minnows. I had a little bait stand, and I can trap.
Hmm.
When I was a teenager, I had more spending money than just about any kid in town because
Did you recruit any other teenagers who were like, Randy,
no,
what and how are you getting this money?
no, that's competition. But I couldn't afford a vehicle. My mom, she had an old Impala that we drove. What a pile of junk. I think it was a 71 or 72 Impala. And so my grandma Clara, my great grandma Clara, she lived in the old folks home, but she still had her car. It's a 1969 Chevy Nova with three on the tree.
Mm,
And she would tell me, Randy, I know you need a vehicle to trap and you can use that, but you better not get it dirty. So I had to stay on asphalt roads. I'd get up really early in the morning. I because I had football practice a lot of the times after school. I'd get up so early, and I'd be out driving on the roads, checking my traps in the dark, and it's what I did. I think my junior and senior year of high school, I caught about 20 red fox, 40 to 50 mink, a couple hundred muskrats, and then my uncle and I'd get together in the springtime. They have a spring beaver season in Minnesota, and we'd catch 100, 120, 130 beaver. And you'd catch some fisher and a few other things. So, but at the time, a good buck mink was paying $20 in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you find a great big red river mink right now. I don't know that you get $20 for them.
I don't think you get three. I was
Yeah,
looking at our recent fur prices from our sale here in Idaho. I mean, it's the
yeah,
market's crawling back if you have an optimistic eye, but it's
right.
nowhere near what it was for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, a fisher. There used to be a lot of fisher in northern Minnesota. I can't remember what we were allowed, 3 or 4 of them. But you get a fisher and that's like 70, $80. You're like, oh my gosh. So I was that kid in high school where even though my parents didn't have my mom and my stepdad when she got remarried, they didn't have much money. I usually had a lot of pocket change.
Yeah.
And it was all because of trapping. And maybe I smelled a little funny when I got on the school bus, and maybe I looked tired because I stayed up skinning fur with down at my uncle's place till late at night. But I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So when you talk about that and the smells, right? A lot of people who
Yeah.
get into trapping, when you talk about lures, you talk about stuff. Were you also making your own lures at this time,
I,
or were you kind of going to like Minnesota Trapline,
yeah.
buying whatever they had available? And
Yeah, I was buying all my lures. I'd go to the Minnesota Trappers convention
Mhm.
they have it in August if I remember right. And I'd go there and I'd buy whatever paste lures and call lures and whatever else I needed. Uh, I would save, for certain things, we'd save our beaver carcasses. And you put some castor and some beaver oil, castor oil on a chunk of beaver meat. I don't care if it's 30 below zero. Anything that walks by is going to smell that and look
Mhm.
at it. So we did that. We'd catch suckers in the river. We'd freeze those up for mink bait. So some of the baits, the actual baits we were doing, but for like call lures and stuff like that, we're buying that stuff.
And it sounds like a lot of it was river creek trapping, whether that mink, beaver. Um, were you starting to dabble into like footholds? Like, was there the coyote problem pretty
Yeah.
rampant there during that time as well?
No, there wasn't. There were still a lot of wolves in northern Minnesota at that
Still
time.
are.
Yeah, and they never left there. So I grew up around wolves my whole life. I've never really, now that we have them in Montana where I live, I've never really had this. Some people are just like, oh my gosh, there's wolves here. Well, I grew up around them, so I didn't really think about it. But I didn't ever set coyote traps. I did a lot of red fox trapping because in northern Minnesota, it's a lot of wetlands and bogs and stuff. But every high ridge, the red fox work those ridges. So I would do that. I never caught a coyote in Minnesota trapping. Not that I couldn't have, but I just never did. But you would catch some wolves, even in these little number 1.5 or number 2 coil springs. Sometimes you'd show up and your trap would be disassembled, right? So
Yeah.
here's a 90-pound wolf. He just grabs it with his teeth, pops the springs out, and you show up and there's the jaws and the springs laying there. Every once in a while, you'd show up and he's still there. And so
Mm.
this was before cell phones. You'd have to drive into town, get the game warden, Craig Backer. Hey, Craig, if you could find him, if he wasn't out. If he wasn't, you'd stop. Hey, Julie, when Craig gets in, tell him I got a wolf in my trap out at, wherever. So
You never
I
had to release one by yourself?
no, I never did. What would happen is you'd tell Craig where it was, and then he'd call the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service people. I think they're in either Grand Rapids or Bemidji. I can't remember, but they would come up and they'd weigh them. They did all the things they did. Well, I just didn't want to deal with the headache of it, so I'm just like, get me the heck out of here. And Craig would bring my trap back to me, and it just happened.
So I think you might be busting a lot of commonly held nomenclature that you need like a big MB 750 trap to hold a wolf or a big no BS trap or one of the big Harris traps. But what's the smallest trap that you've ever held a wolf in?
Yeah. Blake and Lamb 1.5 coil spring.
There you go, folks.
But I, you know, now that we can trap in Montana, if I'm going out, I'm using MB 750s and I'm putting them on, shocks, and I'm
Swivels and
yeah,
pins.
everything. I'm not saying to advocate for that, but it can work. But the thing that it did show me, you know, a wolf can disassemble those smaller traps. They pop those springs out so quick. And if you've ever disassembled the trap, like if you take a pliers and you just pull that spring off there, it just goes like ploop, it just falls apart because it's all held together by the pressure of the springs. And a wolf would get his canine in there somehow, and he'd just pull it apart. And you'd drive up there and walk in, and it's like, boy, these these are some really big fox prints in the dirt or in the snow. The
Yeah.
other thing that would happen is you'd catch a red fox, and you'd be driving down the road and you'd see wolf tracks. You'd see 4 or 5 sets of tracks on each side of the road, and you're like, uh-oh, I'm either gonna have a wolf in this trap, or if I have a fox, and you'd show up there, there'd be nothing but a leg of a fox left in the trap. They
Wow.
would just they would shred that thing to pieces, which, that's what they do with coyotes too. So,
That's what they do with elk and deer.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, they do.
people
And,
heard me talk about it all the time. Like up where we're at, it's just calf kill, elk kill, everything just, and
yeah,
they don't leave a lot in some
no,
instances.
no, and they have no tolerance for other canines. So, uh, it was fun growing up doing that. You know, people ask me about my hunting. Yeah, I started hunting when I was 12, but I started trapping when I was 5 or 6. And for me, trapping has made me such a better hunter. I really can't even explain to what degree my trapping knowledge and trapping skills are incorporated into just my instinctive way of how I approach hunting.
You stole one of the
Uh-oh.
clearly obvious questions that I had for you, which is, as I'm a big advocate for trapping. And
Mhm.
when we talk about other hunters or people who are just hunt curious, I like to try to poke people in the direction of saying, like, if you do want to become a better hunter, whether that's archery elk or antelope hunting, like maybe spend some time trapping for a couple different reasons. But I'd love to hear from you, having started trapping when you're 5, hunting when you're 12. I'd argue that from my perspective, your, presence in the industry is more around hunting than trapping, but maybe talk a little bit about what it is that you picked up from trapping that is translated so well to making you a greater hunter.
Well, I think there's some things that are in the field, and there's some things that aren't in the field. The things that aren't in the field are just you become a student of animals. You read and consume everything. Is there an edition of fur fishing game that comes out that a trapper doesn't read cover to cover?
Mhm.
And if it's something about an animal or a set or some new idea, they'll read it 4 times instead of once. So there's all this knowledge about animal behavior that trappers have figured out way past what most hunters figure out. And then there's out in the field, right? There's reading sign, there's reading scat, reading tracks. How old is this? How long was it? Is this something that was here a week ago, or they just passed through? You learn these relationships, you learn the habitats, because getting within 300 yards of something doesn't count with trapping. I've yet to see a conibear that can catch something 300 yards away. I've never snared an animal that came and just within 300 yards of my snare. So you,
That's a
you
pretty
think
good
about,
perspective. I like that.
yeah. So you have to know, not just is the animal in the area, which with elk, if you get me within the general area of an elk with my center fire rifle, there's a good chance that elk's dying that day. You get me within, whatever distance of a coyote or a fox or whatever it might be, I still got a lot of work to do to get that animal to come and step right where that pan is located. And when they come, okay, I get them within 2 yards. They're there at my set. How do I know? Am I going to do a left hand or a right hand, or right, left foot, right foot? How far back am I going to be? Well, how much slope do I want to have? Because if I have too much slope, they don't have to get as close to look down in if I'm doing a dirt hole set. Okay. How much is too much to push them in when you're trying to get them in a trail set or in a flat set or something, versus how much is too wide, and they're going to step right over your trapper. So people who I've taken a lot of people out trapping, and they're like, how do you know that animal's going to step on that trap? And so when I tell them all the little things trappers know, they're like, holy cow, that's intense level of knowledge. So, uh, and I'm talking about canines there, but whether it's felines, whether it's water animals, like it's still all the same. How do you know which part of the creek on a bottom edge set that's where that mink's gonna swim?
Yep. The time.
Yeah. You do it enough times where the same pattern repeats itself with success, and the other patterns repeat themselves with failure. It's like, well, I don't I don't need to do the things that are failing. There's something about why this is working, and you go replicate it. So uh all of that translates into how I hunt and how I read sign, how I read animals, how I read, scat. It doesn't matter. You really become a student of animals when you're a trapper because you have to. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
And with your schedule, as you kind of went from trapper to hunter, you never stopped being a trapper, but you were a
Right.
hunter, and that's kind of where things took off. You know, Having listened to your podcast, having listened to some of your educational content, like I know you get easily distracted by grouse while you're out elk hunting.
Yeah.
And what I've found is that I'm easily distracted by beaver lodges or
Mhm.
dams, or like I'm out elk hunting, and then all of a sudden I find myself marking places and like
Yeah.
doing the minutia of trapping stuff out of season. So I'm like, well, I need to come back here in October or
Yeah.
wherever. um
Mhm.
is that how it's worked for you, or have you just
Mhm.
been kind of divvied up by like you have your hunting season,
Oh,
then you're
no.
out where you're going to be trapping and you're going to focus on trapping, or is it a through line?
It's a year-round thing. My wife, there's certain times she's like, "I need to drive because you're looking for, whatever as we're driving around, you're gonna run us in the ditch." Uh, for me, marking sign, observing animals, learning what they're doing, it's a year-round thing. Like you're talking, if I go in elk hunting in November, and I was like, you know, I'm seeing all of this beaver sign back here. How fresh is this? Well, I might want to come back in here, or I know downstream there's going to be more of them. So it there's never a time when I'm out in the hills that my mind isn't making mental notes, that I'm not recording things now that we have all these mapping and other thing apps on our phone, that I'm not recording that. And I think that's inherent to successful trappers. You never try to quit learning. You never try, or you try to always be filling your mind with new ideas, new places, new locations.
So before we kind of transition, I want to talk a little bit about trapping in Minnesota, then to Montana. But before we get there,
Mhm.
it's kind of a young Randy Newberg. Can you recount the biggest mistake you ever made on your trap line, and then the biggest mistake you ever made in your fur shed?
Yeah, biggest mistake I ever made on my trap line was in Minnesota. You'd get these early freezes. And how do you keep, a dirt set from freezing? Uh, and you try everything.
Black dirt, you tried the
Yeah,
paper.
all that. And I tried it all, and I missed so many animals. You think, oh, it's not going to get that cold tonight. Well, it did. Or it rains, and you think, oh, everything dried out good. No, as it's drying out, it's pulling that moisture up through the sand. It might look dry on top, but it's pulling moisture, and it gets cold. An elephant could have stepped on some of my traps, and I wouldn't have caught anything. So I'd say learning how to trap dirt sets in cold weather was a challenge. And then when I figured it out, it's like, ooh, all right. So I do some things that I've never seen anyone else do.
I was gonna
So,
ask, are you up for sharing the secret sauce? You don't have
yeah.
to.
Now, glycerin freezes at what? 85 degrees below zero.
Mm,
So you lean out some glycerin and water, and people are like, whoa, why would you put water in there? Well, the water quickly dissipates. So in your trap bed, you spray a bunch of this mix of glycerin and water, and it will not freeze.
wow.
And then you take your pan cover and put it over it, and then you put your first little layer of dirt over your trap, and you spray a little bit, and then when you do your final sifting, let's say we're doing a dirt hole set, right? And you're trying to get that thing in there, and then you douse that thing heavily with more of this concoction of water and glycerin. And then the last thing you do is you just take, something to make it so it doesn't look like it's wet.
Mm-hmm.
You find the driest dirt you can nearby, whether it's sand or whatever, and just put a little skiff over the top of it. Those traps would work down to 40 below zero.
How'd you figure that out? Was that another like old timer trick that got passed down, or were you just
Yep.
that obsessed that you were
No,
mixing?
my uncle was mad about the same thing, and he trapped. That was his livelihood when he wasn't logging, was trapping. And there was an old boy over in Thief River Falls, Minnesota. His last name I think was Israelson. He's an old boy when I was a young kid, and he told him that trick.
Well, I think
And
you might have a lot of excited trappers to learn that trick. I know I will
yeah,
be too, because I'm in central Idaho, and we
mhm,
get not quite as cold as northern Minnesota all the time, but we get down there, and I've dealt with frozen traps, and I've been trying to experiment
yeah,
with all things. So I'll add that to my list. I've got some glycerin sitting here, so
yeah.
gonna mix it
So
up.
a lot of people trapped up in that part of the world, and they'd all quit after a certain time. And my uncle and I would still be pounding them, in well into November. Which up there everything's froze hard by late November, and they're like, How are you keeping these traps working?" They're thinking we're just using wax paper, or we're just using whatever. Uh, I never told.
You probably told them you didn't use anything. You're like, oh, I just
I
put the
I
trap.
can't I can't remember what I told them, but that's yeah, that was one where when we figured it, or when we heard it. So I shouldn't say we figured it out, because this old boy over in Thief River Falls is who told us about it. Uh, and man, did it work.
That's awesome. So
So
freezing traps, found a solution. What about the fur shed? What's the biggest mistake you can remember making in the fur shed?
I had a big pile of muskrats one time. North of Highway 2 in Minnesota, we were allowed to go trap muskrat huts. South of Highway 2, you weren't. So we'd pound the muskrats pretty hard. Uh, and I did not know that you could overflesh a muskrat. Boy, I got to get every little piece off here. Really all you want to do with a muskrat is just get that saddle of fat and right around their front legs and stuff. And if you got a really fat one, yeah, you want to take a little bit and get all that fat off there. The first batch of muskrats, and this was in probably 1978 or 79, muskrats were $4 or $5 which at that time is like, can you believe all these $5 bills swimming around out here? Uh, and I took him down to the fur buyer, and he's like, these things are slipping. What do you do? What do you do to them? Like, I don't know. And well, I found out that you can overflesh a muskrat. You know, but now here's where that is so nice. I still trap a lot of muskrats right now. Even at this point in my life, people are like, "Why do you trap muskrats?" Because it takes me back to when I was a kid, and I get back when I'd send my fur up to the fur auction in Canada. I have these top lot awards
Hmm.
for muskrats, because I'm like the most meticulous muskrat fur handler you've ever seen, because I screwed up that first batch of them, and I was so pissed. I'm like, oh man. Uh, but the fur buyer told me, it's like, whatever you do, don't overstretch them and don't overflesh them, because otherwise, when I peel it back and I look at, I blow on it like they always do,
Hmm.
the fur density, when you stretch them as hard as you're stretching them, it looks like it doesn't look as full. And I'm more concerned about the quality of the fur than I than I am about the length of the rat. So learning experience in the fur shed.
I'm curious as I talk to more and more folks, and everybody knows largely this podcast is self-serving for me because I'm curious. I want to keep learning from people who've trapped their whole lives as I try to, beat down the learning curve on my own journey.
Mhm.
But I'm always curious who's really attracted to trapping, the personality type, because, on the surface you hear like very type A, like very detail oriented. And I think, man, maybe we're all on the spectrum a little bit who really get into trapping. But, you know, I think what you're getting at is like when you run a line, you're tied to that line, you're dedicated to it, you're taking these animals, and then you do have an instance like yourself or like me when I, did my first foxes and screwed them up royally. Like all that effort and passion that goes into capturing an animal. And then you have the responsibility to do what you can with as much of it as you can. The fur is probably the biggest part of that. And
Yeah.
you screw it up, like you have to become meticulous. You have to study the anatomy, every last bit of it to the point where you're saying, like, how much are you stretching it? You might think that's better, but that's really reducing the fur density and you get slippage. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm
And
just curious, like, if you agree with that,
no, I do. And I think the other thing about trappers is we have an ethos of this resource provides for us. We're not going to take that for granted, and we're not going to do a half-baked job on it. Uh, I can almost watch somebody gutting an elk, skinning a deer, and butchering an animal. And if you didn't tell me, I could tell you whether that person is or is not a trapper,
Hmm.
just by how careful and calculated they are with their knife, with their strokes, with everything about it. And maybe I'd be wrong, but I could I, I've yet to see many trappers who were not super meticulous when it comes to cleaning fish, when it comes to butchering their deer, all those things, because I think it's just inherent that we've worked so hard and this is the end product. And the last thing we want to do is, you know, get lazy at the end and not
well,
do what we need to do.
and I think too, when you're out elk hunting, deer hunting, antelope hunting, insert any big game animal, a lot of times, you might not be taking that hide, right?
Right.
But oftentimes a trapper like myself, I always take them because I'm going to
Mm.
tan it or do something with it. And you get that extra level of meticulousness. But I would say that's another hat or feather in the hat for hunters listening to this that might be curious to trap
Yeah.
because to your point, it only makes you a better hunter, or at least a more. Um, I don't think aware is the right word. Maybe you have a better word for it, but a more conscious
Yeah.
hunter.
Yeah. Your utilization of it will improve.
Then I have to ask the question why. Then we're talking about trapping. We're talking about trappers being largely great stewards of the resources that they're taking.
Hmm.
It does seem I won't even say does. It is the fact that trapping seems to be the lowest hanging fruit
Yep.
for anti-hunters, anti-trappers, just people who see this domino to kick over pretty easily. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, like, given if you look at the spectrum of trappers, I'd say 80% fall in what we're talking about. Maybe there's 20%, just like anything else, that might, not be the best human being or just don't have the right reasons behind it.
Hmm.
Why are we so targeted, and why is that not being represented to the public, or why is the public not catching on to the
Yeah.
why behind trapping?
I think a lot of reasons is one, we haven't told our story, right? And I always tell people either you tell your story or someone else is going to tell your story. And when they tell it, it's not going to be the story you wish was told.
Hmm.
And so I think we're kind of loners, right? Trappers are like, yeah, I'm not going to get in a big group of people. We don't, it's not like when you go sit in a duck blind with four other hunters, right? You don't want four other guys following you on the trap line.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of that. I think as society has, a lot of things in our society are driven by fashion, and which then leads to a whole lot of other things that disconnect us from the resource, disconnect us from conservation, disconnect us from the land. And a lot of people don't view trapping as well, they don't eat it. So I'm going to overlay my view of the world on that activity and say, oh, that's bad. Well, they have no idea all the other things that go into it. But we're such a small group of people relative to hunters and even relative to anglers, we're like minuscule. So we're the easy target. We really haven't done a good job of telling our story. And that is part of why I put trapping on my platform. And the most controversial stuff that I put out there is trapping, and I don't give two hoots. If somebody has a problem that I trap, then just unsubscribe and don't watch because I am not changing.
It's
So,
interesting that overlap. So you even see it with people who are following you for hunting content, but
mhm,
then the or trapping content is posted in conjunction, and
yeah,
there's crossover that have an issue with it. I mean,
yeah,
do you take time to and I know the idea of engaging in comments is like
mhm.
wrought or fraught with peril. Like
It
I don't
is.
engage in it, but
Yeah,
I'm curious, like
I do.
you do.
Yep. I
And
that and because I'm not one, I'm not going to walk away from it. Two, I'm proud of what I put out there. Three, it's not necessarily for the discussion between me and that person.
hmm,
It's for the discussion of all the other people who are reading the comments. And 99.9% of the time, I think I can articulate a case for trapping better than that person can articulate a case against trapping. And so I wade right into it. I'm like, just come on down, pack a lunch, pal, because we're gonna be here for a while.
well, you've already got your waders on after like staking your drowning rods and everything, so you're already in it.
Yeah. So you know, and a lot of people are like, I can't believe that, you got this huge brand in the hunting space. Why would you risk that by putting trapping content out there? Because that's who I am. And if you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
you know, that's why one of the guys I know very well in this industry is Fred Eichler.
Mhm.
Fred grew up as a government trapper. When he and I are together, we're going to be together again in June doing a gig. We talk trapping. We don't talk hunting. We talk trapping. Uh, and Fred's not afraid to show that stuff either, and that's why I have so much respect for him. But there are people in spaces, there's some, high profile people in fishing space, even in the hunting space, who like, man, I don't know. Okay, I get it, whatever. They to each their own. But if anyone thinks that I'm backing away from trapping, you're gonna be waiting here for a while. That's gonna be the day I don't have any breath in my body. I mean, right, just this year. I went back to Minnesota. Non-residents can't trap in Minnesota, but my brother was beaver trapping in April. I'm like, man, let me come with. So I went back there. 2 years ago, my buddies Dick and Wally, they were spring beaver trapping. It's all fun. They don't care what the price is, and they catch 100 to 150 in a week. So I was back there for 4 days. I think, just kind of casually, they caught 53.
Are you sure they
Uh,
didn't just invite you back to help skin out those beaver?
oh no, they don't want me skinning because I hate fleshing.
Ah,
I hate fleshing beaver. It's the one part of trapping that I would pay anyone something else to do. So I clean skin, and it takes me forever. And they rough skin and then they flesh. So they're like, get out of the way, Newberg. But doing that, and then this spring, Modern Huntsman sent a guy out to tag along with me
mm.
while they're trapping muskrats. Uh, and so I want to put that out there on these platforms. I want the rest of the world to know that there are people who trap. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You know what? But that doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make the motivations wrong. It doesn't make the benefits to conservation and to wildlife. It doesn't discount any of that. And I don't know. I feel that this legacy that's been, I don't know what the term would be. I feel like I've inherited a very valuable legacy from people who came before me. And the last thing I care to do is water it down and try to paint it and soften it up so it fits in whatever. Yeah, I'm not going to do something stupid like, go throw something out there that's bombastic and intentionally done for the purpose of giving someone the middle finger. But I think our content on trapping is done very tastefully, very educationally. Here's where I think people who can communicate well and have big platforms can make a difference in trapping. So, in where I live in Montana, we have these spring creeks that never freeze.
Mhm.
We have a lot of geothermal activity because we're close to Yellowstone. Well, in the wintertime, when all the other water freezes, the number of muskrats that migrate into these spring creeks is ridiculous. You'll catch so many of them, you'll be like, how could there be this many? Well, when they get into these spring creeks, they start digging right at the water line like rats do. They don't want to go eat this frozen stuff. So right at the water line, they start eating the roots from the bottom, and they build these little benches, burrow into the bank. And after a year of, 800 muskrats on this 1 mile stretch of river, or this 1 mile stretch of spring creek, they've completely destroyed that bank. So I've done this and I've showed people, you know what? This used to be the best trout spawning habitat in this entire stretch of river until the muskrats got in here, sloughed the creek. Now the creek is way wider. The water is way shallower, way warmer, blah, 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 blah. And people are like, I had no idea. There's tons of stories like that that we could tell as trappers that would give people more reason to consider and think about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah. And, it's funny you talk about trapping and that content being controversial. Like, I feel like a dummy sometimes, having put my stake in the ground in the content world to be like something that I love, which is trapping. And it is it's a lightning rod. So I put a nice metal rod in the ground and right in the middle of a storm. But I
Yeah.
do feel like those stories, people who can be articulate, who can, you know, take what we're doing, this year-round pursuit, and show it in a light, like you said, like,
Mhm.
we have otter eating the migrating bull trout at the bottom of our fish ladder, and
Yeah.
that's a problem.
It-
Beaver
Yeah.
flooding roads, and you want to get to your grandkid. Problem.
Mhm.
There's a balance, right? You never want to trap out an area fully, but
Nope.
learning that, and curious to know your thoughts in today's world. What do you think is the most common misconception about trapping?
Uh, it depends on who the audience is. Like the number of hunters who don't like trapping,
Hmm.
it just dumbfounds me. Uh, and so their misconception is slightly different than maybe some of the anti-trapping people. I think w- there's a lot of people who think if it's an animal being trapped, it's an endangered species.
Hmm.
Oh, the beaver, they're trapping the last beaver. Well, if you go to some places in the upper Midwest, beaver are like gophers. I
Mhm.
mean, they're a serious pain in the butt. But people think, oh, they've heard these stories about when the big wave of the fur booms came through in the 1800s and animals got trapped to the commercial pressure put on them was way more than what they could withstand. So there's a lot of people who still think that. There's a lot of people who think that, well, if I let my dog off the leash and it steps in a, you know, number two coil spring, it's gonna kill it. It's not. That's why on some of my videos I've put my hand in a trap
Mhm.
and I stand there and talk to people with my hand in a trap and they're like, "Whoa, your fingers are gonna fall off." No, my fingers aren't gonna fall off. So the number of misconceptions are out there. And that's why I feel people with platforms. And I want to throw out a little bit of credit also to another guy who does not shy away from trapping. And my buddy Steve Ranella on the Meat Eater, him and Seth, they're hardcore trappers.
Mhm.
They're like me. They grew up trapping, and to their credit, they do a lot of trapping content too.
Yep.
So, those are places I think the hunting space has benefited from positive imagery at times. And yeah, sometimes we have some really bad imagery in the hunting space that's damaging. In the trapping space, we probably got to be more careful than anybody. And hopefully, people like me with platforms, people like Steve and the Meat Eater crew and others, we will, when the opportunity allows, we can be out there in front of audiences that probably don't see trapping very often. And we can try shed that light in the way we want our story told, not the way others want the story told.
I agree. And for me, right, having now been in the trapping world, lifting up the rug, so to speak, and you see, I had Jason Phelps on, and we talked about what happened with Washington several years ago, like removing all body gripping traps from public land.
Yep.
Similar, New Mexico, I had the New Mexico Trappers Association president, Chance Thedford, on. They lost 2 years ago all public land trapping,
Yep.
live traps, footholds, conibear snare, everything.
Yep.
And there's momentum. There's
Mhm.
momentum behind those movements. And I had Dan Gates on as well, talking about
Yep.
Colorado and not just trapping, but the mountain lion,
Crazy
bobcat.
stuff.
But eh, to your end, like, it's surprising the number of hunters who aren't supporting trapping, and it seems like we've been, and I haven't been there for that long, so I can't say me, but the industry's been fighting from the bottom up. Like, the trappers have been down there with, bare knuckle boxing, trying to hold on to these rights, and with
Yep.
a lot of times not a lot of support. But I think that's changing, like you said, with these platforms, with folks like you, Steve, others out there showing it. I hope that's what drew me in, to be quite
Yep.
frank, is seeing that as I was getting into hunting and getting curious, and then going in full bore.
Yeah. And the other thing is, uh, trappers, we're like a cross section of society to some degree, just like hunters are. I get so frustrated when I see the hunting community bickering and fighting with each other over things that are just nonsense. I say it's the equivalent of our house is burning down and we're out in the front lawn complaining about the dandelions while our house burns down. We want to focus on the dandelions that mean nothing. I see some of that in the trapping space. You'll see, arguing and bickering and fighting. Not as much as in the hunting space, just because I think th- the critical juncture or the pressures brought to trapping have caused everybody to refocus and say, all right, this we're talking about our existence here as trappers. Whereas hunters still have a more of a social license, if you want to call it, like is a little bit wider, a little more, tolerant or accepted. And so they think they can continue to fight and argue, and you divide into little camps and tribes, and guess how easy that is to pick them off one by one.
Well, I mean, a great example of that is, I had Paul Anzac from Montana on, and we were talking on the show right when the federal mandate to cut, a big chunk off the beginning of the season and the end of the wolf trapping season in Montana hit.
Yeah.
It was devastating for folks who were trying to make livelihood and trying to, manage the wolf population. But then from Idaho, right? Montana, Idaho, very trap positive
Mhm.
states. And I'm guilty. I did not think that this would hit us, and I had
Right.
no clue. And then fast forward to 3 months ago, middle of wolf season, they're like, sorry, federal mandate. We're now cutting off the end of your wolf trapping season, and we're going to be doing the same thing. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. How did that happen? We are the
Right.
most trap friendly state,
Yep.
and we got caught off guard.
Yeah, we got caught off guard. There's some things that go into that about, one of the problems we find ourselves in times is claims are made against our activity, and we haven't been accumulating enough research, data, and information and science to refute the claim that's made. And so these groups come and throw 100 claims at the wall. Oh, they're going to catch grizzly bears during wolf season. I have never heard of a grizzly bear being caught in wolf season. Never.
Mm-mm.
So maybe we got to think about, all right, anticipate where these are. And as much as it's a pain, and we're like, the game and fish doesn't need to know where I'm trapping or what I'm doing. If I'm doing something wrong, okay. But maybe we got to start building data sets and start building information. And it's more work on us, and it's more burden on us, which the burden shouldn't always be on the accused, right? In this country,
It seems
guilty
to
or
be more and
innocent.
more the reality.
Yeah. But I look at some of those, and those are realities. If there's anything that here's a difference I see in the trapping world versus the hunting world. The trapping world lives in reality. It's like, you know what? This could be gone tomorrow. The hunting community still has a little bit of this, oh, nah, this won't go away. We aren't we have a different sense of what the reality is than the trapping community, because like you said, trappers have been fighting this. I remember the first Minnesota Trappers Rendezvous I went to in Pierce, Minnesota. I think I was 14, and there was a call to action there for the legislative efforts. So this is 1978, 79. That's how long. I mean, trapping's been under attack and marginalized since even before when I can recount it. So the fact that it still exists today and is thriving in a lot of places is a testament to those people who fought and who've engaged, who accepted, okay, here's realities. We're a minority. How do we deal within the reality? We can wish for an alternate reality, but that does not solve our problem.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle. Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to be conscious of time,
Mhm.
coming up closer to an hour. I could ask 100 more questions. Maybe we'll have to do a part two sometime in the future if you're up for it. But
I'm up for it. When you can see the smile on my face. We're talking trapping. Yeah, I don't have anything on my calendar that's more important than talking traffic.
Well, then I've got really 3 questions left, so we'll try to juggle that in the last 8 or so minutes.
Okay.
But when you went from Minnesota to Montana, did that change much from a trapping perspective? Were there new animals that you were then targeting that you had to kind of go down the learning curve on?
It it didn't change that much. What I went to college in Nevada, so I
Mm,
lived in Nevada 6 years between Minnesota and Montana, and that was huge. I took up trapping bobcats, snaring bobcats, and gray fox.
mm.
That was so much different than anything I'd ever done, and the fur care was so much different than anything I'd ever done. And so I kind of put the water trapping on the shelf, right? Right. Kind of park that aside because Nevada is the most arid state in the country. There's some water trapping there, but you're not going to do a lot of it. But when I found out that these Great Basin bobcats were bringing in 300-400 bucks a piece, and I could catch, you know, 15 of them while I was going to college, I'm like, that's paying for some tuition. I don't have to work 2 shifts at the sawmill this because I worked at a sawmill and I'd run my trap line from the sawmill to the college in Reno, and then I'd do another route over on the East Loop, uh, and so that there was that gap in between there. When I moved back to Montana, or moved to Montana, I have focused mostly on water trapping, beaver, muskrats, mink, and the reason being, quite a bit is at the time I got a family. I'm super busy in this CPA practice. In my real life, I paid for my bills and built what net worth I might have being a CPA, and so that took a lot of time to build that business. And if you're going to canine trap, it takes a lot more work than water trapping. I was known in Bozeman as the CPA who'll trap your beaver. A number of people on Sourdough Creek, Bozeman Creek, south of town, where it comes out of the mountains, whose beaver problems I've taken care of is a crazy number of people. Golf courses, love creeks, and silver maples and aspens. You couldn't build better beaver habitat than what most of the golf courses in Montana look like.
So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the beaver trapping for folks drive CPA business, or was it CPA business that then drove your beaver trapping?
It started with a couple CPA clients who found out that I trap beaver. One of them I still remember. He's an old boy. He's since passed. He was complaining that here it is in March in Montana. Most of our calving happens in March, and his calving pasture was flooded by these beaver as we started getting snow melt. I'm like, well, I can take care of that for you. He looked at me like, yeah, right. Yeah, I'll be out there. So I came out that weekend and I think set traps late Saturday afternoon. On Sunday, I think I had 4 or 5 beaver. And he got out there with a backhoe and pulled the dam out, and they never came back. And man, he told everybody in the valley, if you got a beaver problem, let me tell you about this CPA. He'll do your taxes, he'll do your estate planning, and he'll take care of your beaver.
That's one
Well,
heck I hope you actually had that slogan on a billboard somewhere.
and then our CPA practice did the work of most of the medical practices in this valley, and a lot of them live in nice places. And the number of beaver that live within the city limits of Bozeman is crazy.
Uh,
And that, all of a sudden their basement's flooded out, or they just spent $12,000 getting this big. There's a nursery here, Cashman Nursery. Jerry Cashman would come out and plant $10,000 worth of silver maples, and they'd wake up one day and half of them are tipped over, and they're like, "I don't know what did that." I'm like, "I can tell you what did that." And so then you come there and you get rid of those beaver. The funny part is most of the urban folks that I trap beaver for want me to go relocate them. They're like, "Well, you're going to live trap them, right?" I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm not hauling them to somebody else and dumping the problem in their backyard. I'm going to knock them on the head. I'm going to skin them. I'm going to eat them, and I'm going to make something out of the hide." They're like, "Really? You're going to eat it?" Yeah. Oh, well, I didn't know that. So I, I it's just, it, it's been fun doing all that. I don't need to do it, but I do it because it's part of who I am.
that's amazing. So with just a few minutes, I'm going to do a
Mhm.
lightning round. So one question popped up when you talked about being in Nevada. Were you around when the whole Claude Dallas
Yep.
fiasco went down? And did you
Yep.
ever beat him to the best?
Nope. Never did. I didn't. That was happening up in kind of northeast, north of Winnemucca,
Mhm.
southern Idaho. I was. We read about it, but no, I never met him.
All right. So for folks who don't know Cloud Dallas, Google it. You'll understand what we're talking about.
Yep.
Interesting little story in Idaho and Nevada trapping history. Um, Second lightning round question: what's the craziest thing you've ever come across in the woods?
Whew, craziest thing. The thing that got my blood pressure up the most is a couple close encounters with grizzly bears while archery elk hunting. But huh, craziest thing I've ever come across in the woods. I wish I would have saw this one coming. I'd have been more prepared. Um, I probably shouldn't say this, but I came across a naked couple spread out on a. And I was like 12 years old. I'm like, what's that all about? That's probably now that I think about it, that's probably the most
Yeah.
surprising, crazy thing.
I've never
I
come across that in the woods.
yeah,
So
it's like I didn't need to see that.
hey, you got to find your own privacy sometimes. So you can't
uh,
blame them, I guess.
yeah, actually, my friend Danny Johnson was with me. And,
Yeah. Well, hopefully it wasn't tick season.
it was interesting. Let's put it that way. And I knew the people. That was the bad part.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like I never looked at them the same ever again.
Well, the question is, did they see you?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because we
okay.
we took off like in a hurry, like whoops.
That's pretty good. You probably maybe they paid you some hush money on the side. That's
No, they didn't pay me anything. I didn't really even want the public to know.
pretty funny. So last question. I always
Yep,
end with a hypothetical.
yep,
So I want to go back to grouse hunting because you definitely turned me on to grouse hunting, which also distracts me just as much as finding trapping sign in the off season. So thanks for that.
good to hear.
Well, I don't know. I think it's made me a worse elk hunter,
Yeah,
ironically, but who knows?
but look at how
Um,
many good chicken dinners you get every
yeah, my
night when
wife's
you're out
really
elk
good at,
hunting.
cleaning grouse. But the hypothetical is this:
Okay.
would you rather live in a world where you can hunt any big game species you want every year, but there are no grouse, or live in a world where you can only hunt grouse, but there's abundant big game species, but no tags?
Hmm. Wow. I don't know. I'm probably gonna go with I get to hunt big game every year.
Mm,
Um, just because I really love eating antelope.
fair.
I I I would trade you 5 pounds of elk meat for 1 pound of pronghorn all day, every day. So and my wife, she's like, well, I guess I better go shoot a pronghorn with you because one pronghorn doesn't last that long.
Hmm.
At least that's the way I go through them. So I love grouse. I love chasing them. I love eating them. I grew up with them. Uh, but that's I'd say I'm probably gonna still hunt pronghorn. If you told me I could only in that other hypothetical scenario, you can only hunt pronghorn, or you can only hunt elk, or you can only hunt mule deer, it'd be pronghorn.
Wow. I mean, I need
Yeah,
to get more on. Is that location dependent? Like, do you have pronghorn you specifically like to eat from an area? From a
hasn't been for me. I've Between me and my son and my wife, we're probably getting close to 60 of them that have been through our freezer, and I've never had one yet that was anything beyond excellent. And I've shot them in, let's see, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. Never, never had a bad one yet.
wow.
So,
Well, there you go. And Randy, first off, thank you. I mean, you've done a
yeah.
lot in the hunting community. I got into this through hunting, watching a lot of your content. Trapping took me and put me at the bottom of a drowning rod and never let me back up. But you know, uh,
Well, we're not that far apart.
no,
If you ever get up this way,
but we'll do it.
uh,
I'll be up there for Tough Fest, and for people who are unaware, Mountain Tough to sponsor this show. We'll have an event in June, so I will be over around that time. But
okay.
vice versa, if you're over in Idaho, please stop by. But where can people find? I mean, it seems obvious, but a lot of people listening will know where to find your content. But
Yeah.
where can they find it? Where can they find some of your trapping content if they're only used to your hunting content? Is it just kind of interspersed? So let
Yeah.
folks know.
Yeah, most of it is the trapping content you're looking for is going to be on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg or Fresh Tracks. You you type in Randy Newberg in the search bar on YouTube and it'll pop up. We have a forum, a very large forum that does right now. There's a really popular thread out there. I'd say our forum has more trappers on it than any hunting forum out there. It's called hunttalk.com. A lot of trapping out there. I post all my trapping escapade out there. Social media, I posted on, you know, people see me walking around with a fur hat here in Bozeman. So this is a funny. Do you have one time for a
Well, we've got as
sidebar?
much time as you want. I just try to
You
time
know,
block this for your sake, so we can go
it,
as long as you want.
they call Bozeman Bose Angeles, and I understand why. It has changed so much. I've lived here 33 years. But a friend of mine in Southeast Alaska, she sent me a sea otter hat. Uh, and so I wear that a lot. Well, one day I'm like, all right, I'm gonna put my beaver hat on because it's cold. And I go to this same coffee shop every morning. They see me coming in. I don't even have to order. They're like, okay, he wants his ham and cheese croissant, and he's gonna hand us his tumbler, and we're gonna put dark drip with cream in it.
Well, hold on. Are you still eating your ham and cheese croissant, or is Sarah over
Yeah.
there slapping it out of your hand?
Well, I used to eat scones, and they're like, "No, you gotta at least have some protein with your breakfast." So, but anyhow, it's one cold morning last winter, not this winter that just ended, but the winter before, and this lady's looking at me, and I'm like, "Oh, she sees my beaver hat. I know what's coming." I mean, the way she's dressed, I'm in my head, I'm thinking she's a tourist from LA. She's here to ski. And so we're standing there in the line, and she's like, "Where'd you get your hat?" I'm like, "Well, it's a long story, but the short version is I got it up here by Riverside Golf Course." She's like, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, they have a beaver problem there. It's been flooding out a bunch of houses." And so they called me, and I went and I trapped the beaver, and then I ate them. And then to get to the meat, I had to skin them, and I stretched it, and I sent the hides off, and I had this hat made, and I got a pair of mittens and everything. And she paused for a second, and she just looked at me, and she's like, "That is so cool." I'm like thinking, okay, I'm gonna get lit up, right? I'm gonna end up here in my favorite coffee shop in a debate over trapping. So you never know how someone is going to respond to that. And the lesson for me there was don't assume everybody has the opinion you think they might.
Hmm.
This lady did not look like the person who would be open-minded to someone explaining why they or where they got the fur hat. And she was all about it. Afterwards, she asked me all kinds of follow-up questions. And so,
Did she
it was,
feel it? Because I think that's one thing that I have
mhm,
found gets people over the edge is
yeah.
feeling
Oh, yeah.
real fur.
Yeah, I pulled it off. I'm like, "Feel this." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea it was that soft." And so I pulled back all the guard hair and show her all the under fur, and she's like, "Oh, no wonder it's so warm." I'm like, "Yeah, that's why a beaver can live in this cold water, da da da." And
And it's
so,
renewable. It's not built off of petroleum. If you,
yeah,
for whatever reason, tire of it, you can throw it in a landfill or you can pass it down. It'll last forever as an heirloom in the family. Like there's so
yeah.
many benefits that go
So
through.
anyhow, uh, the the point of that when I started talking about my social media channels, I posted that story out on social media. I'm standing there with my beaver hat on. It's freezing cold, uh, and just said, ran into a really cool person who was seriously and genuinely interested about trapping today, and it surprised me. I learned from that encounter. So, my I I don't I don't know how to use Instagram or Facebook, so I apologize for that. I have this crew that does it. I can struggle through it. Let's put it that way. But the Instagram, it's Randy Newberg Hunter. Uh, Facebook is the same thing, Randy Newberg Hunter. And pretty much if you Google us, it'll pop up where you can find us. And so,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well,
If
Randy, thank you so much.
yeah,
Follow Randy. Go check out Mountain Tough. Check out what's the name of the program again?
Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg.
Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg, but the Mountain Tough program.
The Mountain Tough program. It's not out yet. It's going to be
Okay.
out later this summer, and it's going to be the 50 plus preseason prep
So keep
program.
an eye out for that and save your promo code for checking that one out. But everybody,
Yeah,
until next time, thank
yeah.
you for listening to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.
Thanks for